do that. But, it takes time to solve and sort these things out, because everyone who wants to exercise power is exercising it, and they're not really questioning or reviewing whether or not they have those powers before they exercise them, which means, Joe every day has got to decide for themselves, am I going to be the one to challenge this? Am I going to be the one to be arrested or to a ticket or to a warrant? Not everybody is as strong as, for example, like Carl the barber, who will just say, I'll run it till the ship goes down. Most people just can't or won't take that kind of risk. And who can blame them necessarily?
Well, yeah, I totally understand that people don't want to be hurt by the government. I also think that the takeaway of our liberty is so extreme now that it's disconcerting that more people aren't putting themselves forward, because it's one thing when it's just Carl the barber. It's hard to believe that if thousands of businesses refuse to obey the government, that they would be able to have meaningful enforcement and that there wouldn't be community response to this. But I think one of the big issues is that people just feel beaten down, and it's not just from the government, it's also from a major part of the public, from the radical left that's willing to terrorize anybody that stands up for their own civil liberties.
Well, and that's a difficult pill for people to swallow, and I'm not faulting them necessarily for it, because who wants to be the test to be arrested and sit in jail for 6 months while this law is being tested in the courts? Or who wants to be the one that looks at a $1,000 a day fine with no end in sight? And one of the disappointments as a lawyer that I've had recently is that the lackluster protections that come from our judiciary. I've seen. I mean, one of the things that's been surprising to me is how easy it has been for judges to simply kick the can down the road and say, "We'll deal with this again some other day." And the story I tell is what I call the Abraham Lincoln story. During the Civil War, Lincoln, which everyone kind of celebrates as being a great civil rights leader, was actually a pretty anti-First Amendment leader. And one of the things he did at the time was he created these military tribunals to try anybody who was vocal against the Union. And of course, lawyers like, I'm certain, guys like myself and Matt ran to federal court and said, issue a writ of habeas corpus, and they did. And of course, Lincoln suspended habeas corpus. I'm not going to do it. And these lawyers ran to the federal courts and said, give us writ of habeas corpus, protect us from this. And of course, the answer was no, kick the can. Finally, in 1968, or 1868, excuse me, not 1960, 1868, the U.S. Supreme Court took a case and said, well, of course, Abraham Lincoln did not have the authority to suspend habeas corpus. But a lot of people had to sit in jail all through the Civil War and for the years after the Civil War before that decision got made. And so the part that bothers me is that sometimes I feel like our judges are just not brave enough sometimes to stand up and protect civil rights and constitutional rights. And it's very troubling to me as an attorney.
Yeah, I agree with you, Phil. I think it's gonna, just like that, 2-3 years from now, you're going to have probably almost unanimous recognition amongst high courts. Well, of course, a governor can't take over the entire reins of government just because they feel that there's an emergency. Of course, that's obvious. But then when we're going through it, it's obviously, as you were kind of saying in the Abraham Lincoln story with habeas corpus, it doesn't appear too apparent at the moment. The doors are being slammed in everyone's face in these cases. In our face, I think unfortunately for this, it's just going to take time. The emergency really has to pass. Courts are not great at getting out in front of problems. They're very reactive institutions. And it doesn't mean that we stop filing the cases. You have to keep filing the cases because that's how we build precedent. But you have to be willing when you file these cases. You have to be willing as a client to be able to fund something that's probably never going to have any practical effect for you, number one. And number two, as a lawyer, you have to be able to, number one, be comfortable with the fact that you're probably going to lose, that you start to become somewhat of an outsider amongst just the general normal bar, because you're not filing normal normal cases. You're filing cases that have a constitutional, almost political tinge to them. So, there's just not a lot of us out there. As I said earlier, Phil and I are sitting around just thinking, how could we be the first two lawyers to file a case like this? I mean, there has to be other like-minded lawyers out there who are willing to put their name out there, take the risk, start bringing some of these cases, but they're just not. That's probably one of the more dangerous developments that we've had, is that there's just not a lot of lawyers out there willing to bring these cases.
Yeah, we have the same problem in the legislature, with too few politicians really willing to push back and challenge the lockdowns in a fundamental way. And my saying on all this is, leaders come last. It really takes the grassroots and the people really pushing back before the elected officials. And judges are not as vulnerable as the average state rep, but certainly they are still elected, and I think they feel like they're accountable to the legal community in some way. And I think maybe that's a big part of the problem, is that judges see the world through their own perceptions, and often that comes from law reviews and what's going on at universities and things like that. And it's a hugely left-wing world, and the notion that this is all radically dangerous it just has not yet penetrated.
Well, it just goes back to what I said. There's just not enough out there. There's not enough resources. And a lot of times, frankly, Phil and I have ideas, or there's cases that really need to be brought. We just can't find clients. We can't find clients who are willing enough to say, look, even if they don't have to pay, they're still just, I'm not putting myself out there. I'm not putting my family out there. I don't need to be in the news. And I think that's a dangerous thing for us, particularly people, who have similar belief systems that the three of us do. I think we need to do a better job organizing. I mean, put it this way. I mean, a society like ours, the way we do battle is through lawsuits. The lawyers are the swords of the modern era. And if you only have a half dozen or a dozen of them out there, I mean, that you're not really going to get much done. I mean, Phil and I are two people. There are other lawyers out there who do great work. But there's just like I said, just not enough of them. So we need to do a better job recruiting, organizing, and making sure they're ready to face some of these things, because the only way it's going to change.
Yeah, I would point out that, Carl the Barber has had tremendous success ever since resisting. He won his case. He's become at least a statewide figure. Marlena, I don't remember her last name, but she raised $300,000 almost for her legal defense, maybe more by now. And people are interested in these cases. They want their liberty back, and they're willing to lay down what it takes to raise these legal defenses. But But speaking of that, so yeah, we did have a problem with YouTube. We are live again, but as happened last week, it's shifted over to a new link, so people are starting to find it and they're coming back into the chat now. So I apologize for the mess. For those of you who are here right now, please feel free to chime in with your questions. Otherwise, we will be able to recover everything to at least post and send out to the email list after the fact. But again, it's such a tragedy that this keeps happening. And I hope to discover, when I first moved to this place, Comcast would not provide internet service to my house. And I have been using my phone for the last 8 years, which usually works great. But every now and then it just screws up and there's a hiccup and it goes south. So I called Comcast a week ago and they said they would look into seeing if they could provide me service. I'm supposed to hear back from them pretty soon. So hopefully this won't keep happening in the future.
Am I hearing that you're a big supporter of the Biden infrastructure bill?
Oh, God.
No, I heard him just say he hooked his cell phone to his 8-track is what I just heard him say. So
yeah, I mean, it is a modern miracle that my phone is providing all of this live streaming, that the signal is coming in down through the internet into my phone, over to my computer, through the recorder, back into my phone and back up again. So, I mean, it's pretty impressive that it works at all, but obviously it's just not practical for what we're trying to do right now. So anyway, just wanted to rant and vent about how frustrating this is, because I know people are going to be disappointed when, especially those that were actually in the chat originally and have not been able to find that the stream is back online again. But anyway, let's shift topics. We've been talking about this one for a half hour, and we've got a lot of other things to go through. So the other big case that you guys represented a candidate who is now a state representative serving with distinction, and a poll challenger. And it kind of came about as the result of a discovery I made. And by the way, I have come forward as the guy that was the source of what was the Detroit poll worker training, where they basically admitted what they were going to do was use us and use the COVID-19 social distance rules to impede poll challengers. And that led directly to a lawsuit at the Secretary of State, which I thought you won 6 days before the election. But lo and behold, actually winning a settlement from the Secretary of State didn't seem to make a difference. So what the heck happened? And why don't you tell the story and then talk about where things are with that now? Because I think it's not over yet, is it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, just to kind of introduce the case, the plaintiffs were State Representative Steve Cara, and then the poll challenger you represented was a gentleman named Bob Cushman. These were, as I mentioned, we have a hard time finding people who are willing to kind of put themselves out there, and those guys deserve all the credit. I mean, Steve was running an active campaign for the House. Bob is he's a regular guy who was willing to kind of face the ire of the public, to try to fix something that he thought was wrong. So those guys deserve an enormous amount of credit. The gist of the suit, and it can get kind of technical, so I'll try to just give you the bird's eye view. For anyone who was involved in person voting last year, and it started with the primaries, is what you had was a situation where polling stations are overseen by poll challengers and election observers. Mm-hmm. These people have, at least in the state of Michigan, they have a certain set of rights that to interfere with any of those rights is actually a felony. They're able to observe polling books and ballots, and I could go on and on, but these are set rights that cannot be interfered with. And as I mentioned, it's a felony to interfere with it.
And by the way, when I had told you guys about what we discovered, they were saying, I did not know that interfering with poll workers or poll challengers was a felony at the time. We've been blasting that information out for the last 6 months to the point where now that's something Republicans or at least our people well understand. But you guys get all the credit because we didn't know anything about that. And we all I knew at the time was that was what they were doing in Detroit. But as you discovered, it was actually the Secretary of State's policy.
Right. So it goes beyond that. I'm going from memory here, I'm not looking at the statute, but I believe there was actually a provision in there that if you denied them just daily conveniences, such as a bathroom, a place to sit and take a break, that too was a felony. So in other words, the poll challengers, they have a very special place in our law. And that really it comes down to election integrity. We all, and it's a very bipartisan issue, we all have to have confidence that our elections are fair, open, and run the way that they should be run. So what had happened as we were, kind of getting into this COVID thing, I guess I'll call it, the Secretary of State had put out a series of directives and guidance to all of the precinct stations, and of course, statewide there are, just tons of these things. I mean, they're run at a very local level. And this was a long, complicated document, but in short, all of those rights that I was explaining to you, the ability to observe poll books and things like that. Number one, they were conditioned on poll challengers wearing masks. Right to get go, I was concerned, and a number of people were concerned that, look, most people were wearing masks. And it's, I guess, not that big of a deal, but there are some people out there who can't wear a mask, or at least they can't wear one for 10, 12 hours for various health reasons. We were worried that this guidance that the Secretary of State had put out, would exclude or kind of disenfranchise those persons. And I mean, just from a legal perspective, a bigger concern I had is you couldn't condition a poll challenger's ability to work on anything, let alone wearing a mask. Secondly, there were various regulations and stipulations in there about how far someone had to be from a table, and we were starting to hear from some of these poll challengers that they just literally couldn't do their job. In some cases, you're quite literally dealing with books and papers, and it's not something that you can confirm that a worker is doing the right thing from a distance of 6 feet. So I mean, that was the problem, and that, I guess, I didn't vote in person personally during the primary, So I didn't have a chance to really observe this, but I was told from a number of people that this was really causing a problem. And as I mentioned, poll challengers do very important work, and they catch a lot of errors that are quickly fixed. So, you know, we were approached by a number of people, and I believe including you, Adam. You know, at this point, I think only 2 weeks from the general election, which, you know, and when it comes to a lawsuit, I mean, that is just, I mean, lawsuits take years. You know, we think in time frame years. And when I was told about the problem, I thought, you know, I have literally, I think at that point maybe 10 days to try to do something here. I absolutely agreed right off the get-go that basically the entirety of what the Secretary of State had put out was a complete violation of the election laws. You know, but we were able to put together, basically through working through a night. Phil and I started working on this thing in an afternoon, worked through the entire night. We were able to get it down to the Michigan Court of Claims by the end of the next day. Apparently, we're able to interest you know, the judge that we were assigned to, and she set a hearing the following Tuesday, which I believe at this point that would have been exactly 1 week before the election. Yep. Yeah, so
you guys moved with lightning speed on this. That's amazing. I mean,
yeah, there was not a whole lot of sleep there.
I mean, I'm showing the suit on my screen here. Actually, this is the motion for injunctive relief. There's the original filing. Then there's another. I mean, there's 10 pages of argument, but then there's also 40 pages of exhibits. So this was.
Yeah, I mean, that was the issue. Is if you just file a complaint, well, that's not going to do anything. You know, you have to file a motion for some sort of immediate order. So, I mean, I quite literally drove this thing down, was able to get down there about 4 o'clock on a Friday, and had to physically go over to the Secretary of State's office and try to find the most senior person in that building to serve the lawsuit, you know, hoping that we were going to have this hearing the following week. You know, to the Secretary of State's credit, you know, the morning of the hearing, you know, and I don't want to go into detail. I don't want to betray any confidences that you know, with the Attorney General's office, you know, the person that I worked with, but we were able to have a real solid debate and discussion about what our claims were and what we thought would, you know, what we thought were possible solutions, and we were able to reach an agreement quite literally. I think that was inked about 30 seconds before the hearing started. I mean, if I remember right, Phil was actually in the hearing texting me and said, "Hey, look, judge is getting impatient. She's waiting for you." You know, that's how that settled. That quite literally settled on the steps of the courthouse. You know, what's happened since? You know, here I was thinking we had really done something special. And in the short of it, the Secretary of State agreed. Yes, this is a violation of the election law. You know, we're doing our best here in light of a pandemic, and obviously there's a lot of people concerned about getting sick. You know, so we still want something in there about masks, but at the same time, we acknowledge that the person can't wear a mask. You know, try a face mask if you can, or do something else. You know, do your best to stay away from people. You know, you don't necessarily need to be hugging them, but you know, if you have to get close to them to do your job, no one can interfere with you. So I was feeling, and I know Phil was, we were feeling very good about what we had done. You know, we received a lot of calls from a lot of, I guess, higher-ranking Republican Party officials and lawyers, you know, letting us know that, you know, this was kind of the biggest issue was out there, and this is going to, you know, this is going to make a real difference. And of course, I watched in horror the next Tuesday as the election proceeded, and it kind of appeared, at least in certain areas of the state, that everything that we had accomplished was just not being followed at all. So
it was completely ignored. I was a poll worker in the city of Detroit on election day. We received no guidance from the Secretary of State whatsoever. I spoke to city clerks and asked them, did you receive updated information from the Secretary of State about the rights of poll challengers and what this case had accomplished? And nobody had heard a thing about it. Nothing.
Well, and a couple of things on that. I mean, number one, just to be clear, in a case like that, you know, you have to sue someone, and the court order that ultimately results in the case is only really applicable to that person. You know, so in that case, it was the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State was ordered to create some amended guidance that we worked with the Attorney General on fairly short notice to put together. That we believe kind of agreed and kind of fixed a lot of these problems. And then the Secretary of State was ordered to produce that to basically what amounted to every clerk, every election clerk out there within about 24 hours. I've also heard since that it would appear that order may have not been strictly followed. I don't know that one way or the other. And as lawyers, we're always very careful of. I don't want to accuse someone of violating a court order, because that's ultimately accusing someone of contempt. I don't want to say that until I know that for a fact. But one thing to remember: cases are never wasted. I guess is what I want to say. They're never wasted because it's a building block. If it does come out, and it will at some point, because the fact of the matter is these were sent by email. Right? These can be traced. Yeah. And if it comes out at a later date that it wasn't done, well, now we can be back and we can look for redress for that. That there was a binding court order and you didn't follow it and you need to be punished for it. So these things are never wasted.
Yeah, the Secretary of State, from the clerks I've spoken to, was contacting all of the clerks on a daily basis in the run-up to the election. And this was never mentioned at all. I mean, I can show you some emails that she had sent out. No mention of it. Now, there may be something that was missed because as I wasn't a clerk myself, I can't say that everything I've seen was everything that was ever sent out. But the ones I've spoken to said they haven't seen anything. And not only that, but I mean, this decision was reached 6 days before Election Day. But then there was a recount in Eaton County, and I got a call from Gina Johnson saying that her poll challengers were, even then, this is now weeks later after the election, with Secretary of State officials present on the site, still impeding poll challengers and getting away with it.
Yeah, I mean, and I can get into that in a second because the case is building blocks. But let me just say this, Adam. There are things in motion that I understand. Things are people are looking into that issue as to what was actually shared or not shared. So that case is not done. And as I said, I believe that was the only successful election case in the entire cycle in the state of Michigan. I will share just a frustration with you. Once again, this is a bipartisan effort. I don't want to make it partisan, but at least from a lawyer's perspective, I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at a Republican Party, for example. That's a very well-funded operation. I would imagine there's a lot of sophisticated operators, kind of advancing that political movement. It is malpractice. So I don't know who it is, and I don't even need to know. But the fact that there was not a legal front or a legal group organized well in advance to address this issue and similar issues. I mean, these things could have all been timely addressed, 6 months in advance, 9 months in advance, and that was, one thing that when I kind of mentioned, where is everybody?
Yeah, and I don't know that there weren't any cases filed. One thing, I watched Robert Barnes, the attorney who does a weekly show, and he says, it's amazing how courts have the ability to dismiss election suits for any number of reasons. In fact, he says it's unripe in the spring, it's standing in summer, latches in fall, mootness in winter. And but that being said, you're right. We had Marion Sheridan on last week, and there was her and a small group called the Election Integrity Fund that were, and I guess myself to some extent, they were working on what we saw coming in the election, knowing for the last 4 years, the Democrats have been ginning up their supporters to look at Trump as the second coming of Hitler, and knowing they would do everything they could possibly get away with, and even some stuff they might not get away with. And the Republicans didn't seem like they could possibly imagine they would do something like that. By the way, Matt, you and I've been going for a while, and I don't want to exclude Phil. So Phil, please feel free to pipe in anytime on this stuff.
You're fine, God. You guys keep going. This is Matt. So what a lot of times happen is with Matt and I is that one of us takes the lead on different cases, and it's just because it's just the nature of how the litigation works. And this is in Matt's wheelhouse, so I have no problem with that at all. So
all right, fair enough. Well, we were trying to figure out how to make this work so we could see all three of us at once on the screen. Instead, it's weird. It's making it so that I have to manually shift from one to the other, and so I only have one at a time. So I feel like I'm trying to be more equitable on screen time here, but anyway, feel free to pipe in anytime. And in the meantime, I
Not a
guess we can go
problem.
back to Matt. But anyway,
Listen, we're professional lawyers. We know how to jump in and cause a scene anytime we need to. So don't feel bad for the least for a second there.
all right,
So,
fair enough. So it sounds like there is something else in the works, and I understand there might not be too much you can tell us. But if there is anything you can tell us, I'm sure the audience will be interested to know of anything that may yet be in motion, or anything that might already be in motion. Because if anything's been filed, I'm not aware of anything at all.
You're speaking with respect to the first case.
Well, not with the Kara case, because I think that one's, well, maybe it's not over, but with what's going on with Gina Johnson, because because her poll challengers were impeded after the fact on day one of the recount. The second day, I called up my friend Stephen Kara, now a representative elect at the time, not to mention another gentleman who works in the legislature, and had them go down to be there and see what they were doing. Because, it's good to have witnesses whose credibility is, I'm a state representative. And we thought maybe if anything untoward was happening in that recount, it would be good for there to be evidence of that and witnesses of the highest caliber of credibility.
Yeah, I mean that's how I had kind of the advantage in this one, get kind of pulled in. I guess it was a 2-day recount, and just to introduce it, the candidate's name was Gina Johnson. She's I would put her right there with you, Adam, with a Bob Cushman, with a Stephen Kara. I mean, she's a warrior. She could be living just comfortably private, running her business and enjoying her family, but she, has certain political beliefs and she's going to fight for them. So Gina was unsuccessful in her election and demanded a recount. So that recount, and that's something you pay for. I mean, they're fairly expensive. So Gina had purchased a recount, which I believe was a 2-day affair. So I was contacted the second day, and at that point, the thing had kind of completely went off the rails. Once again, everything that we thought we had established, with what I would call the Kara Cushman case, agreeing to the certain rights that election challengers and observers have, had apparently just went out completely out the window. In Eaton County. I mean, I was able to kind of see some videos, some live pictures. I mean, you had election workers counting ballots and had put like opaque shower curtains hung up from the ceiling. I mean, it was just they were denying people. People were trying to wear the face masks. They couldn't wear the face mask, well, they wanted to put on the shields, and they said, well, you can't put on the shields. I mean, everything that we had already covered. And, so I tried to jump in right off the get-go. I contacted the lawyer that we had dealt with in the Kara case and said, look, I'm going to send you some pictures. I mean, there's just no dispute. This is absolutely absurd. You have at least, I think at that point, 4 or 5 Bureau of Election officials right on the ground in the building. Just someone reach out, fix this. Everything doesn't have to be a lawsuit. So I did my best there, and within about 20-25 minutes, right from the top, the answer was, no, we're just not going to fix it. We're just not going
to do our legal duty.
You know what they told me? They told me, well, all of those things that we agreed to, all of the things that we agreed to in the actual general election. Well, this isn't a general election. This is so yeah, I mean that's about the most unsatisfying answer you could possibly have. So I guess our position is just once again kind of bird's eye view is that Gina purchased something, and it was expensive, and she didn't get it. So when I talk about these cases being building blocks, I mean there were a lot of attempts for home runs on election cases this year. And I can just tell you, and Phil can definitely tell you, when you're handling cases against the government, it is very, very difficult, if not almost impossible, to get a home run against the government. You need to move in tiny baby steps over years sometimes. So, where you have the Kara case and the Cushman case, kind of establishing certain certain rights and confirming certain rights that election challengers have, at least in the election this time. That order is something now that kind of parlays in Gina's case, where we can say, look, you agreed here, or you were ordered here. This is the rights election observers had, and 6 weeks later, we didn't do it here. So what we're going to try to establish in this case, and I don't want to get too legally nerdy here, but basically, in sum, we are asking the government for a refund. And I know that seems, well, that's not, what is that really going to do? It will do something. If the government now knows that they're in a situation where someone comes and, for example, in this case, demands a recount and you don't get it, you don't get what you paid for, they're going to have to start writing checks. Is that going to cause any sort of dramatic financial problems for any of these townships or counties? No, it's not. But that also establishes, I think, just as a practical matter, that there is going to be some sort of retribution if you don't follow the rules.
Yeah, it's an acknowledgement of wrongdoing that the secretary.
Right. That's a lot of times that's all you're looking for. You're looking for the government to either agree or be told by a judge that look, you just didn't do this right, and that's what I think we need to start doing. Is we need to start, even though all of these cases may seem small and insignificant in a vacuum, if you can start getting orders, settlements, whatever it may be, establishing that just these acknowledgments that the government is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, I think that's your best chance to kind of prevent future misbehavior.
Yeah, one of the things that we've included in our election reform proposal is that every poll worker has to be trained to know that impeding poll challengers is a felony.
Yeah.
And there's other elements of it too, which we've gone through in other streams. I don't want to rehash every moment of that, but
right.
But that being said, because there's so much that went wrong. I mean, the way we constructed our election reform proposal was what went wrong, and there was everything from in Detroit in particular, they were controlling who they were hiring to be poll workers, which is as important as it is for a campaign to have poll challengers. Poll workers are even more important because they're the ones that actually make the decisions. A poll challenger can say, "This, you're doing this wrong," but if the poll worker says, "I don't have to do that, I don't care, I'm going to do it anyway," your only next recourse is litigation. Right. But the impeding of poll challengers, that was done with the help of the Detroit police. These were serial felonies that were occurring at TCF Center. And the people that were calling the police to help were instead the ones that were being harmed. I mean, I had one attorney, and I don't know if this is correct or not, but someone who was, I guess, somewhere in Trump's legal orbit or with one of these outside groups that was helping with some of the legal efforts, said, yeah, those are federal felonies at that point. You're talking conspiracy to commit state felonies. And I don't know if that's correct or not, but the lawlessness was absolutely unreal. And that's just one element of it. There's the poll workers, the poll challengers. There was, now the courts even said the signature verification policy of the Secretary of State was unlawful. I mean, we just saw in California, they rejected 20% of the signatures for the recall of the governor and less than 1% of the signatures in the election itself. So if 20% of signatures, if 5% of signatures on absentee ballots are invalid, and you're tossing out 5% of absentee ballots for not having a valid signature match, I mean, right there, especially if there's a partisan slant to the absentee ballots, that could have a huge impact on the election result. And, in Michigan, we had a 150,000 vote margin reportedly, but Arizona and Georgia and Wisconsin were far closer. And in the election coming up, we have campaigns and candidates for governor, attorney general, secretary of state, Congress, state house, state rep, and some of these can be really, really close. Right. You can swing majorities that way.
The difficulty, Adam, is, election cases they're notoriously difficult. Number one, there's always a political tinge to them. Which makes things difficult. But secondly, it's what is your remedy going to be? Like I said, with Miss Johnson here, I can't go back and get her another recount at this point. It just can't be done. And I think that's maybe one thing that needs to be built into some of these reforms. And I know they're not popular, but some sort of I don't know, some sort of private liability or something to that extent that would at least put some teeth into things like this. Because otherwise, you're in this spot where, I mean, what do you do? I mean, yes, we should absolutely be out there. Even if it's just a judgment for $1, we should absolutely be out there getting these judgments, as mentioned, for reasons that they build on, they set precedent. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, do local elected officials really care about that? I doubt it. I doubt it. But they might if they actually had to put, some of their own skin in the game.
Yeah, and I wonder if there isn't some, at least professional penalty that could be established for a clerk or a bureau of, or a board of elections or something like that. I mean, maybe there's a financial component of it. I mean, one aspect of it, of course, it's too late at this point, but there were some legal challenges that were filed immediately after the election where, like Robert Barnes pointed out, Georgia had a runoff. I mean, they had another election. So is it beyond the realm of a court's power to have another election as part of that order? I don't think so, because they're certainly capable of doing it. That's what a runoff is another election, basically.
I mean, practically, legally, could that be done? Sure. Practically, I can just tell you,
right.
It would be extremely difficult to get a judge to do that. I mean, judges are like anyone else. They go to work. Most of them do a good job. They try their best to get it right. More times than they get it wrong. But that's asking a lot of a judge to do something like that.
Well, maybe talking about a judge trying to get it right is a good transition point to talking about this other case you guys have been working on, which I really want to introduce to our audience. And unfortunately, we did lose about half of it when we had that glitch earlier. But as I say, it will be on the recording, and we do want to make our audience aware of this. This started back when I worked in Representative Riley's office. It was a case that was brought to my attention by one of his constituents, Marine Corps veteran, and his son was being charged with making a terrorist threat, which is a 20-year felony in Michigan. And the way he came to us wasn't to say, what can you do to protect my son and what can you do to help us in our case? He came to us and just asked, could you maybe clarify this law a little bit, because other people could get caught up in this in the future? And that was all he was asking. He wasn't asking for us to intervene in his defense or anything like that. But when I looked at the law and then I understood what the facts of the case were, it was just absolutely mind-boggling, because what happened to the guy who's, I don't want to call him a kid because he was, I think, 20 at the time, but he was a student at college, and all he did was post a photo of his lawfully owned, lawfully carried, actually at the time was checked in at the gun locker at his university, because he was attending Lake Superior State University, which is a gun-friendly campus. And he was charged for making a joke among his friends that said, "This ought to make the snowflakes melt, huh?" And on that basis alone, he has had his entire life destroyed for the past 2 years. And, well, why don't you guys take it from the top and tell the audience what exactly has happened here? Because this struck me when I saw it as one of the most egregious abuses of the prosecutorial system, and a case that was at the nexus of so many of these important issues: the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, cancel culture, the invasion of the radical left on campus. All this stuff kind of just came down on this guy like in an absolute storm, and it's been dragging on unbelievably. And then, of course, because of COVID, now it's taken a lot longer to get a resolution. So why don't you tell us what's going on with all this?
I will probably have you shift over here to second to Phil. This has turned into an appellate case, and there's not many lawyers I know better at appellate cases than Phil. But I guess I would just kind of agree with you. I mean, this is one of those cases where all of these cultural forces that are out there right now have kind of come and convalesced in this one individual case against one individual guy, Lucas Gerhardt. Like I said, if I start talking about this case, I'll probably talk about it until 7:00 in the morning. So I will turn over to Phil, and I think he can probably give you a much better kind of lay of the legal land right now where it's at.
Sure.
So I appreciate Matt's compliment there, of course, because I have him. He's the guy that redlines my briefs, and so sometimes I wonder if he actually appreciates those unique legal quips in there. But
well, I am a brutal editor myself, and when I even get a good piece of writing, I will redline most of it. And I gotta tell someone, look, it's not that I don't like what you wrote. It's like I'm gonna give you every suggestion I can think of, and please don't be insulted because I know what this looks like to you.
Well, I'll tell you, if between my wife as a professor and my co-counsel here is an editor and this stuff, so between the two of them, I think they buy red ink by the gallon, But nonetheless, Garrett or the Gerhardt case is one that is an interesting one in the respect that I've been carrying a lot of First Amendment cases for a long time, and of course, First Amendment cases you think would be extremely popular with courts because it's protecting, which has got to be one of the most cherished rights that we have in this country, which is the right to speak one's mind without reprisal or retaliation or the police showing up at your doorstep or government punishing you for your own opinions, regardless of what your opinions are. And this case kind of highlights, and it's disappointing to me somewhat because I am from Lake Superior State University. I went there for my undergrad. I graduated from there. I have 2 degrees from there. And so the folks who are listening, so they understand, Lake Superior is unique. And I think it's the only one in Michigan where you can bring your firearms onto campus. Now, when I say firearms, I'm talking shotguns, rifles, your ARs, your Ninja Stars, if you want those, your nunchucks. I mean, whatever weapons you want, you can bring on campus, but you can't keep them in your dorm. You have to check them into what we called up there the armory, which is the nicer word for the basement of the campus security building, right? It's just a room down there where you keep these firearms, you keep your ammunition. Anytime you want to go out hunting or sport shooting or whatever, which of course is a very, for that particular university, for the folks that go there, that is not uncommon. And so even someone like myself, who's not much of a gun person myself, it was not an unusual or off-putting circumstance to see this by any means. But what happened, of course, is exactly what you said. Lucas made a joke between his friends on Snapchat. It got sent out, and someone who was not a recipient of the snap took a screenshot of it and was just horrified by him making a joke about a gun. And of course, the testimony. Now, I wasn't involved with the initial kickoff parts, but we have the transcript. And her testimony was just unbelievable, and that it was, I'm fearful because I'm a liberal, and as a liberal, they use the word snowflake, and really because he's talking about melting snowflakes, he must mean that he's going to come up and shoot me.
Yeah, because I am a snowflake. I mean, it's the irony is she gave life to the term. I mean, that's exactly why they are called snowflakes.
I mean, there was a lot. It was a strained connection. I'll say that. You had to make a lot of hops to make it feel like she herself was being threatened, especially given that she wasn't the recipient of this Snapchat. And of course, those who were the recipients of it knew he was making a joke. But it became no joke. It became quite a serious thing because, of course, by the time he got up to campus, checked in his firearms, again, totally normal up there. For those, I mean, it's got to be. I'm actually somewhat surprised they still even have this policy anymore, given in today's world of we can't even talk about guns, let alone have them on a campus somewhere. But they checked it in. Next thing you know, he gets a knock at the door from the Sault Ste. Marie City Police. They question him about this. Hey, it was a joke. There was no threat, no nothing. Nonetheless, they arrested him, and maybe, and I'm saying big maybe it was a joke in poor taste. If he's guilty of anything, maybe it's a joke in poor taste, but it certainly wasn't a threat. But because
Sure.
it dealt with guns, and guns are the new taboo thing we don't talk about, the local prosecutor up there charged him not with some minor charge or whatever. I mean, he charged him with making a terrorist threat. That can mean up to 20 years in prison. Now, I'm not, and I say prison, I'm not talking about the jail where you can check yourself in and out like in Mayberry. This is state hardcore prison that you're talking about going to for up to 20 years. We have fought tooth and nail to get that case dismissed up in that court, and the courts will not, and the prosecutor will not dismiss those cases. So we had to take the unusual step of asking for an emergency appeal to the Michigan Court of Appeals, which was actively opposed by the prosecutor.
Yep.
And asked the Michigan Court of Appeals, step in. This is this was clearly a joke. And one of the things that was kind of disturbing is the prosecutor actually only included half of the snap as a part of the case too. And so, from a lawyer standpoint, we've got, I hate to call it doctored evidence, but it's at least incomplete evidence. It's, the main witness is someone who is got to be one of the most overly sensitive people I've ever seen, where she must be seeing shadows everywhere of people. And she's going to a campus that's hunter friendly and has this firearm policy. I mean, just all these things are coalescing around. And in one of the rare moves, the Michigan Court of Appeals took the case early, and what's called an interlocutory appeal. So we are fighting on numerous fronts right now, trying to get a successful outcome for Lucas, in that, hey, you may not agree with his message. You may not like the fact that he likes guns. You may not like the fact that he made jokes about liking guns. But you don't get to throw someone in jail or punish them or seek long-term prison sentence for someone's exercising of their First Amendment rights. And that's what we're trying to protect with this particular case. Because a combination of things, you're talking, and you were right about the coalescing of these various issues. If you don't like what someone is saying, don't talk to them. It's that simple, right? But this young woman.
And by the way, because you had mentioned earlier, she must be so sensitive. I'm not going to give her the benefit of that doubt. I think her intention was to destroy this young man's life. And so far, thanks to the judge, she's been successful at it. I mean, besides the case still going on, you didn't mention he's been under house arrest he was in jail for 83 full days, and then under house arrest ever since, denied every single motion to be released from bail. I mean, this is insane. And
and I agree with you 100%. So just so your listeners understand is, yes, when he was arrested, he could not get bail because of the conditions that the courts placed upon the circumstance. He's from Oakland County. He's, of course, for those who don't know, Lake Superior State University, where he was attending, of all things, as a criminal justice major to become a police officer, of all things. He's a veteran. He's been serving in the military.
The father was,
Well, his father. I mean, the point is that this is one of those circumstances where common sense should be prevailing, and if common sense shouldn't prevail, constitutional protections should absolutely prevail, and yet none of that is happening here. So what we're working on right now, and we're waiting for an oral argument date right now, is the opportunity to ask the higher courts in Michigan to say there are constitutional rights protected for speech, even speech about guns, even speech about, even if you personally think it's in bad taste, which I personally don't, but to the extent it is, you still don't get to use the power of the state, the power of jail time, the power of, as Adam identified, he was in no bail for 83 days, then finally got out, and he has been on a tether, which doesn't allow him to leave his house, and he's been on that. I have to ask him. I mean, it's been, I don't know if it's 2 years yet, but it's got to be getting close if he's not there already. I mean, which essentially is a jail confinement to the quarters of your house. Can't go to school, can't go to work, this is absolutely crazy. And so, one of the things we're working very hard, and we've been very glad that you've been able to send us this case to be able to try to help this young man. But what puts fear into my heart as a lawyer, and especially someone who works very, very hard to protect the First Amendment is that how this could possibly happen in today's day and age. I mean, I am dumbfounded that this could actually occur. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that happens with, the opposition parties in banana republics. It doesn't. It's not supposed to happen in America, and I sure as heck it should not be happening at my alma mater, but yet it is, and here we are today.
Yeah, when I was growing up in the 1990s, we thought it had just been this ongoing progression in favor of free speech in America. We came out of the puritanical age when there's words you couldn't say in movies and TV, and now you could say and do anything. And that has absolutely reversed course now to the point where, I mean, we mentioned cancel culture, and again, we could talk all night about all the crazy things that are happening in the media to the point where it's not remotely a free speech climate anymore. It's like the old saying, "Don't tell bomb jokes at the airport." Well, now the internet, your entire life on the internet is one giant security line where anything you say can be misinterpreted by everybody, and that's grounds for them not just to detain you, but to destroy your entire life. And
but let me push back on something on there. I disagree with you. I'm going to disagree with you and point out something. You are right that it's been a culture where we are more permissive about all sorts of topics, about sex and violence and, striking out against people and protesting people. Those things, we still protect those things. Those things have not been reined in with the contract. Yeah. It's only certain topics that have been reined in. And I'm not as politically minded as other folks, and I'm sure as heck not as too politically minded as the two of you two I'm looking at on the screen right now. I'm a libertarian by nature, and of course, I generally dislike all aspects of politics because government's too involved with our lives altogether. But what I find disturbing is that I can turn on Facebook and see almost naked people dancing around in music videos with nobody complaining. Because if you remember, how was it in the 90s? Tipper Gore was screaming about how terrible these lyrics are about in rap music and rap songs. And today it's a commonplace on Facebook, but you make a joke about a legally owned firearm that had, where he wasn't threatening to shoot the snowflakes, for gosh sakes. And yet this guy goes to jail for 3 months, damn near, and he's been on house arrest for 2 years. To me, it's unbelievable. Yeah. And so what's happening, that culture right now, it's certain topics, and I think that's hugely problematic.
Yeah, you are right about that. I will say, sir, as a fellow libertarian, you have to be involved in politics anyway. And I know you guys don't like to be. Well, my political background, by the way, I'm an old Ron Pauler. I first got really involved in politics in the Ron Paul presidential campaign. And we learned you have to work within the GOP. And that's awful, but we are a two-party country, and the only way to decide who we choose to be our leaders is to get involved in the campaigns, the elections, and the policy discussion. And the people who write academic papers about why Social Security is bankrupt and all the rest, it's not enough. You got to get in the arena, because that's the only way we're going to restore our liberty. So anyway, that said, I want to get back to talking about Lucas here, and let me show you, and of course, well, I'm not showing you, I'm showing the audience. You've already seen this because you submitted this. This was an expert opinion turned in on Lucas's behalf, and this came in your case, and I think this has been included in the appeal, and it's the director of the Michigan State University First Amendment Law Clinic, who I'm guessing just by her employer is of the more liberal persuasion, but she makes this.
Adam, if you were at one end of the spectrum, you would have to get binoculars to see her at the other end. We'll put it that way.
but thinking about the lunacy of this case, this is settled law. It's not like we haven't had First Amendment cases on much more extreme issues before. And this is and I don't know if I want to find, well, let me just get to the bottom of it here. This is a lengthy opinion. Here we go. Conclusion. As director of the Michigan State University First Amendment Law Clinic, my interest in writing this expert opinion does not arise out of my support for the words used by Lucas Gerhardt or his message, but rather my hope that vital First Amendment protections provided to American citizens by the U.S. Constitution do not get smothered as political tensions in the nation rise. To me personally, Lucas Garrett's language is deeply offensive. Yeah, she must be to the far left, because nothing you said is remotely offensive to any reasonable person. And nevertheless, even to her, this inappropriate and distressing language that doesn't offend or abuse rarely needs to be protected from censorship and punishment, but is much more dangerous to our American democracy and our robust marketplace of ideas to suppress offensive political speech than it is to allow the chance for it to offend or distress others. Lucas Garrett should never have been charged for violating the anti-terrorism threat law, which carries the potential of a 20-year prison sentence because his Snapchat posting is protected speech. This case should be dismissed. And I would say Lucas, when this is all over, needs to sue the daylights out of this university for what they've done to his son. This is all absolutely and totally improper. Maybe not the university, maybe the county is what I meant to say by that. But
well, there's a number of people that we're looking into at this very carefully because, of course, as you've picked up tonight, Matt and I, of course, are civil rights attorneys on this respect. But, and again, the only way sometimes these things change is that, I'm sure Lucas Gerhardt, the morning when he posted the joke to Snapchat, he was not expecting to be having to become a major advocate of the First Amendment. But sometimes when people are the recipients of the fuzzy side of the lollipop, if you will, because of what the government has done to them, they've realized how precarious those rights are when they're not protected, and they need to be protected. And so that's why, I always, I think it was Ronald Reagan said about being one generation away at any time from losing these rights. And I'm not sure he's right. And I'll tell you why, because I think it's even less than one generation is what it's turning into.
yeah,
And that's what my fear is, and again, I always laugh, a lot of the work that I do and Matt does will turn into access to government records or access to public meetings. I do a lot of work with the Open Meetings Act, for example, First Amendment issues. And one of the things that I tell people is that I don't care what your political persuasion is. I don't want to see anybody from any one side trying to cancel out someone else. Now, you can disagree with them. You can tell them they're wrong. You can tell them that there's a lot of people I see on TV whose ideas I think are really bad ideas for our country and really bad. I will defend to the end their right to be able to advocate for those. Just because when their rights are protected, my rights are protected at the same time. When the lowliest among us are protected from overreach, we're all protected that way. So, I know it's easy hopefully your listeners, and if I'm going to stand in my soapbox here for 10 seconds and say, it's easy to say, that's happening to somebody else, right?
yeah.
I can assure you, Lucas Gerhardt had no intentions of having to deal with this for years. And if he gets convicted, we're going to take it all the way to the end if we have to here. But the point though is that it's going to be years, and he's always going to be answering about what happened here, even if this case is dismissed. That's unfair to him. And the problem is that it's going to happen to somebody else, and it could happen to anybody else out there. So we need, and kind of jumping back on the theme that Matt was talking about, we need these building blocks here with these precedents to tell folks like the prosecutor and the judge and the cops in Sault Ste. Marie, stop. You don't have the right or ability to do these kinds of things.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, I don't want to step on Phil here, but you see, first of all, just to comment, it's been a little bit since I've seen Professor Costello's opinion, but we picked Professor Costello for a reason. Number one, she's a noted First Amendment scholar. She just knows her stuff. But number two, we're aware of her political background, and we knew that she would find these atrocious. And we thought, if we can take someone who's literally on the opposite end of the spectrum, but who we know will give a fair look, this would mean more than anything else we could do.
Yeah.
The fact that we have, I don't want to label her, but she's definitely a lefty, I would say. The fact that she would come and say, look, this is clearly within the scope of the First Amendment. That's a big development for us.
Yeah.
But the second thing I want to point out here, and just kind of parlay into what Phil was just saying. I've seen this. It's troubling. You're seeing the government, and by the government I mean prosecutors, or in this case, a prosecutor, singling out one particular person and then just throwing the entire weight of their office and of the state's resources, behind them at that person. And it's in this case, it's a criminal case, and what you find is that in almost every case, that person will take a plea, or that person will be convicted, and they will. That's the only result that they'll accept. So, that's the hard thing. Is it's just so incredibly unfair. Particularly when there's no retribution for bringing a case that fails. Is that, I mean, in this case, I think it was pointed out. I mean, Lucas's dad is a retired colonel in the Marine Corps. Lucas is an Eagle Scout. I mean, Lucas doesn't have a bunch of prior juvenile convictions or anything like that. I mean, he's a model American kid, and it didn't matter. I mean, that family has done everything you could possibly do right, and when it came down to it, he could still be subject, and is subject to what I think kind of amounts to a political hit.
Of course,
and
it is.
And it's just it feels that. I mean, it's almost unbelievable that something like this could happen. But when it does happen, I think everyone needs to get behind someone like that. And I don't necessarily mean financially, but people need to speak out and say, look, I heard that happened, and tell other people that this happened. And just really get behind someone like this, because it's just absolutely unacceptable. It is unacceptable. I'm as confident as a lawyer could ever be that at the end of the day that this will be successful on all counts. But with that said, I mean, he can't get back the last couple of years. I mean, he's stuck. It's pathetic.
So, well, first of all, if the case is before the Court of Appeals, when do you think they're going to take it up? When do you think there will be an argument and possibly a decision on this? If it doesn't, does it just go to trial then? And in that case, I mean, I can't imagine a jury, especially a jury from the Upper Peninsula, convicting this kid when the facts are laid out in front of them. I think they're going to be as disgusted by this entire thing as we are. But what's going on with the appeal?
So I mean, I'll let Phil discuss the appeal more, but I mean, I'll just to answer your direct question. The interlocutory appeal is a special appeal. That really takes them. So really, when you're asking for an interlocutory appeal, you're in the middle of your trial case. The case is not done. Lucas's criminal case is not done. It's awaiting trial. So you have to ask permission from the Court of Appeals, and you in essence have to make all your arguments, and you have to convince at least 2 judges out of 3 that it's a case that they should consider on an emergency basis, meaning it's important enough, or the issues are big enough that we really can't let this thing go to trial. There's things that need to be answered. I can't give you exact statistics. I know Phil probably can. It's like a 1 in 100 thing, if that. And they've already said yes in a 2-1 vote that we are going to take this case and we are going to hear it. So there is going to be a decision. And I'll turn back to Phil, but it's my understanding that that's probably going to be within the next couple of months.
Yeah, I anticipate that we would probably have an oral argument probably coming up in June or July, I suspect, and a decision to follow thereafter. But we would hope that the court would dismiss, meaning the Michigan Court of Appeals would order the trial court to dismiss the case. But we just don't know. I mean, it's we're while the principles of the First Amendment we think are well established, the court in Michigan will handle these anything but established. So we hope that it's going to be a good summer for Lucas, but we have to, as lawyers, also plan for the absolute worst, and by extension, his family has to prepare for the absolute worst as well, which makes it difficult sometimes to have those conversations, but we do. We've dedicated ourselves. I know Adam, you've offered your help in the past and given us the opportunity to talk about these things in cases like this, but help is necessary sometimes because it's, as much as we can carry the water in the courtroom, a lot of times the pressure comes from the outside in that can help folks like this, say, to folks like the computer or to, other elected officials. What are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you destroying this family over, for them, it might be a game. For Lucas, this has been the worst 2 years of his entire life, and it's not over yet, with no understanding of when it could be over.
Yeah. And it's amazing how long this has taken. I mean, we were taught in grade school about this right to a speedy trial. And that's just, I assume it's mostly because of COVID as the pretext, which is an abomination of its own, that people, like people don't have important legal disputes or criminal cases that are at least as pressing as a virus that kills less than 1% of people that get it.
Well, let me just say this. I would say it's a 1-2 punch. It's a combination of COVID. Yes, there's COVID aspect to it, but the second part of it is that one of the strategies we had to ask the Court of Appeals early elongates the time before there's going to be a trial. But at the same time is we got to, we balance those interests, those considerations, so that we could get a early ruling from the Michigan Court of Appeals. We don't know how that's going to necessarily turn out, how broadly or how narrowly. And again, what I find even more amazing, as Matt pointed out, the decision to even take the case was 2-1. Yeah. So there were still judges that looked at this circumstance and thought this was not worthy of the court's time to consider in this aspect, this early in the case, at least.
That's a shame, but you still made it to 2-1, and that's astounding. With, you said, about 1 in 100 shot of getting a Court of Appeals to hear an interlocutory appeal.
Matt's the eternal optimist in this. That's an optimist number. The numbers are even worse than that. I mean, it's, what I would equate it to is about the equivalent of the U.S. Supreme Court taking your case early. It doesn't happen. Now, I'll say this: it happens more frequently for the government when they do it.
Yeah.
But when the defendant side, meaning the citizen, whether you're a citizen plaintiff or you're a citizen defendant in a criminal case, they almost never take these cases. But I'm very, very glad that the 2 judges that did vote to take this case got it there. So all we needed, as I always joke, doesn't matter how many say no, so long as more than 50% say yes. So and we'll take it.
Well, I would hope the 2 judges that voted yes to take up the appeal were not necessarily of the Republican conservative persuasion, because it would be nice to know that free speech is not completely dead on the political left. Although I think, especially with all that's been going on in this country over the past year, it seems like that's been the case more and more and more, and rapidly so in the last few years. But on that note, I did want to put up on the screen, because we have been working very hard to try to crowdfund for Lucas's legal defense. And as you folks have all heard, this case might be dragging on for quite a long time yet. And, at Rescue Michigan, we're trying to raise money for our own purposes, but I can't not ask people to support Lucas Gerhard if at all possible. And I see we have some viewers, and I hope when we send out an email follow-up tomorrow, where we will be talking about this case in some detail, that people can help out Lucas, because if anyone's been involved in the legal system knows that court costs can get extremely expensive very quickly. And even if they do manage to succeed in winning the criminal case without too much further intervention, if he's to engage in any kind of lawsuit to recover the lost years of his life, those cases can get very expensive very quickly. They can drag on for years. The opposing side can drain taxpayer money in frivolous motions. Discovery can be very expensive, and all that takes considerable financial resources. And as I think we've said, this is an extraordinary case of some of the most egregious abuses of prosecutorial discretion to go after someone for exercising their First Amendment rights. And this is a case we should be all shouting from the rooftops. So if you all want to support Lucas, the web browser keeps changing the address to the donation page. But if you go to GoFundMe.com and then with hyphens, Justice for Lucas G, just like that, in the address bar. That will take you to that donation page. I will also put that into our email blast tomorrow, because I think this case is so important, and I'm so glad that you guys are the ones representing him, because as I've said before, I think your legal work is absolutely outstanding. And that's been true of the now 3 different cases I guess we've worked on together, because I was involved with, although I was not the one that hired you guys. I didn't know about you at the time, but Michigan United for Liberty suing the governor of Michigan, suing the Secretary of State of Michigan, winning. I hope suing her again and winning a second time in that round. And I hope you guys absolutely destroy this prosecutor. And I hope that the Rescue Michigan Coalition is going to be building the grassroots all over Michigan for reclaiming our liberty. And that involves also, by the way, campaigns and elections, because these prosecutors are going to get for re-election someday, and it's going to take a rich grassroots movement to break into the legal system, because in my experience, it's very hard to organize people in legal related campaigns and races and things like that. But what has been happening in this case is just absolutely beyond the pale. So everybody watching, and I hope everybody that receives this email tomorrow, please support Lucas's legal defense. Please support it as generously as you can, because we need another win here, guys. And this might go on for some time yet. And this has already been going on for nearly 2 years now. So with that, I don't see too many comments in chat, although Mark Gerhard did note that Representative Riley introduced House Bill 5483 to change this law, as well directly due to this case. And that bill, I hope we get reintroduced and get it further in the process this year. Although I should point out, the bill basically only says, "Hey dummies, here's what the First Amendment says." Because as you guys pointed out in your motions, there is actually a law, literally right below the statute on the terrorist threat, that says the prosecutor shall not prosecute cases that are presumptively protected by the First Amendment. The anti-terrorism threat statute is 750, which is the penal code .543M. That other one is 543Z. It's right there. And that's supposed to be protection enough. So what I think we were really trying to do with that bill is draw more attention to this and really make this an issue, because this is, I mean, and you guys know from the cases that you do, and by the way, feel free to talk about some of the other work that you do, but you always go with the most powerful evidence that you have. And if there's any more powerful evidence that our First Amendment is in grave jeopardy in Michigan, I don't know of a stronger case than this.
I agree with you, and that's, a lot of the cases that I like to bring is that somebody's rights have been violated at a meeting or something like that. I can bring a federal lawsuit. We just finished a case involving where a little township supervisor didn't like the fact that someone put up a big recall sign as to them and to support another candidate. They sent the zoning officer down to issue them 11 $500 tickets for having, quote, an illegal political sign that just happened to be, surprise, surprise, not supportive of his position. We ended up resolving that case with a settlement where they've agreed to change their ordinance, and all the tickets were canceled and they compensated them and the whole bit. What's troubling about this case, of course, is that client wasn't sitting in home confinement when it's a federal lawsuit on that. Yeah. Lucas, unfortunately, has had to support the First Amendment in the toughest way possible, which is, of course, being in home confinement, waiting for his day in court to vindicate his First Amendment rights and say this should have never started to begin with. So, we've got cases like, I wish all my cases were one where the folks can, let us do work out there without harm or penalty to them and protect those principles. But some people, unfortunately, we give Lucas, and I know I can speak this for Matt, on behalf of Matt with this, we give Lucas a ton of credit, trusting us to carry this torch, because, at the end of the day, Matt and I are ones that are looking at prison time. We go home at the end of the day. He's facing down the barrel of prison time. It's still saying we need to fight on, we need to march on, and we need to protect these rights. And I give him the utmost credit and respect for what he's doing. And my hope is with conversations like we're having right now is that others realize how important it is to make sure that we protect our rights, because unfortunately sometimes it's too easy with the flick of a pen, a prosecutor, or the flick of a pen from a governor, or flick of a pen from a president to see our rights finished, and how are we going to get those back if you let them go? And so I hope we can learn from this and tell people we need to stand up for these kinds of things going forward. So
I would also point out that what has really been a huge help in Lucas's case is the community support that he's gotten. And that comes not just from Representative Riley, who has been pushing this issue, but because they have organized groups in his neighborhood, in his township, and in neighboring townships. Most of the contributions that he's gotten have been from local sources, and stuff like this is happening everywhere. I was at a meeting where we had a gentleman from Rochester Hills, which is not far from Lucas at all, and they have a school board that is aggressively pursuing charges against people who showed up to their meetings and recorded them and got in their faces and said what they were doing was improper. And they're pursuing criminal charges against these people, and now they're organizing for the school board's recall. And you can't do that if you don't have a local organization. And I'm sure you guys have more stories about the crazy stuff that happens at the local level. And the only way we're going to be able to beat back on so many of these different problems, because I mean, there's the state level, there's the federal level, but there's stuff that's happening in all of these communities and this is why we have these grassroots leadership tools, and we tell people you need to knock on doors in your neighborhood and build something locally, because a countywide effort with even 100 people is not going to be able to keep up with all the crazy stuff that's going on out there. So it really is important.
Let me add one more thought out there too. Everyone always cares about we vote for president. I'll tell you, from my perspective as a lawyer, with dealing with government issues and where government retaliates, you need to be concerned who your township supervisor, your town mayor is, who your prosecutor is, who your sheriff is in your particular communities, because those individuals have more and can interfere more with your life, generally speaking, than some politicians in Washington, D.C. Now, I'm not saying the Washington, D.C. politicians don't clearly do, but these little pockets of power that exist in your local community are hugely important. And so make sure when you to your listeners, I know your listening group is a very politically active group that way, you got to be sure that you kick out the bad ones and make sure and hold the ones that do want to get in there and can go in there, that you hold them accountable, so that as we always joke in the legal profession, we call it black robe disease for elected judges who've been there too long, or the prosecutor's pen gets well worn. What happens is they think what's good for them is good for the community, and they sometimes forget that they're there to serve, they're not there to receive. And hopefully that we as the electorate can make sure we remind that of people who serve in those political offices.
Yeah, and not only that, but it's easier to hold your local officials accountable if you've got a local organization, because if you're trying to remove, a congressman or a U.S. senator, you can only organize so many people, and unless there's a campaign going on that's got much larger resources and interconnectedness, you're only going to make a dent. But one person, and I've seen local organizations. That's what Representative Riley did before he even got elected. Was they replaced most of their town council. And that can be done by anybody, by you, if you go out and knock on doors. And it's the hardest thing for people to do. And I know that we want to be safe, and we want to just post things online. And I shouldn't be saying that, because I just sent out an email encouraging everyone to post things on our website. But the reality is you have to get out in the real world and do it. And that's the last thing that people want to do, is to leave that comfort zone and get involved in talking to strangers. But the fact is, you go out and knock on a few doors, and you'll get people that are interested, you'll get people that aren't home, you'll get people that don't like you, but then you'll find people before you know it that are grateful that you reached out to them and want to get involved and just never knew how. And that's how local groups start, and that's how things change in this country. And that's what Democrats have understood. That's why Barack Obama's political background was as a community organizer, because that stuff actually works. So with that, we've been going for a while, but I just wanted to open the floor, first of all, for anyone that's in the chat that wants to ask him any questions about any of these cases. I know we've covered a lot of topics, and also, of course, feel free to ask anything of me and what Rescue Michigan is up to. But also, if there is anything that you guys want to add, and anything that you want to bring to people's attention, because I know there's a lot going on out there, and we've only talked about a little bit of it. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, no, I was just going to say the thing Matt and I need from folks more than anything is, I mean, I don't want everybody calling me Monday morning at 9 o'clock, but one of the things that how we find out about these things is folks, like, for example, Adam, you calling us saying, you know, I got this circumstance. I think this guy needs help. Maybe we can't help him, but maybe we can get people that can help him. But what we need anything is to see, when you see an injustice, right? You got to tell somebody, right? And it's so easy to simply just say, let's fob this off. This can be someone else's problem. You know, Matt and I are going to be rolling out in the very near future some lawsuits that you're going to hear about, and others are going to hear about. That was literally brought to us on a whim, you know, where someone just thought it was unfair, brought us to our attention. And next thing you know, we're talking class action lawsuits on behalf of probably, 100,000 people, and didn't realize 100,000 people had suffered the same injustice by the government that way.
Well, you be sure to keep us posted, because we would love to promote those suits. I'm
certain, and we will. We most absolutely will. But I guess the one thing is, if I can encourage folks, is if you see something like that, contact us. Go onto our websites, and find us on there. Unfortunately, because I'm a litigator, I'm not available every day. I have to go to court, usually 4 or 5 times a week, mostly by Zoom these days. But tell us about these things so we can start digging into them, so that maybe we can, start investigating those. And sometimes those lead to important cases that change the law for everybody, not just for yourself, going forward. So, Matt, I don't know if you've had anything you wanted to throw in. I've been gabbing here for a while, but
no, I just echo what you said. Just kind of going back to the building blocks theme. That's what it comes down to. Everyone wants to go, everyone wants to shoot for the home run, but the real change is it's incremental. It's piece by piece by piece, and it's painstaking. It's boring. I mean, I understand, in this age of the internet and social media and all of this stuff, we want instant gratification. But if you want to use the legal system, that entire 1/3 of our government, if you want to use that to affect change, you just have to understand that it's not how that system works. It's bite-sized pieces, but it does add up quick. It's tough as a person to want to kind of start a 2 or 3 year long lawsuit. But before you know it, you have made a real substantive change that affects, if we're dealing with state law, one person very easily can change the rules for the better for 10 million people if they just have the courage to stand up and say, look, there's something wrong. I need to find a lawyer help me out. It's not necessarily about my personal pocketbook, but this is something that I think is wrong and should be changed. The average person can and does, particularly in our practices, can make a real difference for a lot of people that in some cases, these rules that established are going to last 100 years. So I just like what Phil says. If something isn't looking right, stand up.
But I would recommend highly that you contact Matt's office, though.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, so call Phil Ellison.
Yeah,
he'll be happy to take your calls.
Well, I know after the election, the attorneys that were working on those elections cases were just absolutely drinking from a fire hose, and I was connected to, or I got connected to, the Great Lakes Justice Center, who took my witness statement, and then dozens of these got turned in various cases, and everybody was working in a panic. But that's not the normal state of things. And often, even if even if one attorney's too busy to take your case, sometimes they can make a referral. And I'd also point out the game is starting to change on being able to crowdfund legal expenses. And I hesitate to endorse GoFundMe. We set it up and it's still here for Lucas, but they've been shutting down some politically sensitive issues, which is probably a First Amendment problem of its own. But there's also GiveSendGo.com and others. And when people reach out online and in their communities, legal expenses are always a big problem for people because they add up real easily. But, your attorney can help you prepare the facts of the case in such a way that you can present those to your friends, to your neighbors, to your family, and can do a whole lot to make possible what otherwise might not be financially in the legal world. And it really is important that we keep bringing out these cases because it is a whole branch of government. And I think especially right now, it's dangerous where the judicial system has been going. And I think especially with respect to the elections, part of the problem is that these cases haven't been brought to judges' attention the way that the left has been pounding and pounding and pounding and pounding on their doors. And it's like Robert Barnes, the attorney, says, I'll always, if I can, file requesting cert with the U.S. Supreme Court, even a case I don't think they're going to take up, because I want the law clerk to read my arguments. I want them to read them again and again and again if possible, because you got to keep banging on the door. So with that, we did get another comment from Mark Gerhard. It says, Lucas would like to pass along his eternal gratitude and your dedication. Well, look, we pass on our gratitude to Lucas for sticking up for his rights, which is more than some people will do. And going back to the fundamental issue at stake here, actually, the shirt my undershirt has a quote from Edward Snowden, and it says, saying you don't care about surveillance because you've got nothing to hide is like saying you don't care about free speech because you've got nothing to say. And he makes the argument to say that taking for granted you should care about free speech, even if your speech is not in jeopardy, you should also still care about your civil rights from surveillance. But even that, the underlying assumption is that everyone should care about free speech. And it's incredible to see how that's been eroded and how what used to be common ground for everybody, at least for most reasonable people, is slipping away. And we've got to reclaim that. We've got to keep fighting. So thanks for all that you guys do. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm very sorry about the technical difficulties. I swear we're going to have to do something to make this more possible because it is just too frustrating not to be able to connect to our supporters. And we might even have to go back to using Zoom again, which at least we had more interaction on Zoom. But the problem with it is it also threatens people's anonymity. And I don't know that we want to be exposing all of our members to having their image and likeness up on the screen in the archive conversation. So we might try a different format next week. So thanks everybody for bearing with us. Thank you to those who have managed to find the relocated stream after that extraordinarily annoying hiccup. And I will try to splice everything together so that we have one complete video that people can watch after the fact. And again, if you can, please support Lucas's legal defense. This is a case that we absolutely need to knock out of the park. And Matt and Phil have done extraordinary work on this case, which I'm going to reckon has probably racked up more legal expenses than that number you see on the screen there. So he could certainly use additional support. And again, it might even go further than that, depending on what the future of the case holds. So with that, thank you both for joining us tonight. Thank you for everything that you're doing. And, if your office is getting overwhelmed, I'm okay with asking people to contact me if they want to have someone triage their cases for them and maybe bring them to you. But again, folks, yeah, if you are having your civil rights trampled on, if you have an egregious abuse that's coming from a health department on your First Amendment rights, these are issues that should be litigated. And I think we've got two guys that joined us tonight who have been absolute champions at defending those rights. So thanks again, gentlemen. We really appreciate it. We're going to call it a show. Is there anything else for the good of the order before we close it down?
Don't give up. Just keep going.
I agree.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you. And thanks again to everyone watching for all that you do for liberty. Have a great night.